Hi, Brent Porcio, TopVelocity.net, doing a pitch analysis here with Zach. I'm going to pair him up with our Japanese pitcher, Sao. Okay, let's take Zach into his leg lift. Take a Sao into his leg lift. Okay, Zach is being a little too aggressive with the leg lift, just swinging his leg up. Problem is, wherever there's an action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. So that's going to the reaction is going to be that lift leg just taking off and getting way out in front and overpowering the delivery. So, as we can see in the peak of his lift, he's still, he's still kind of balanced up. So when you're swinging your leg up hard and back, it's throwing your momentum away from going forward, which is where we're trying to go. We want to shift our momentum forward early, start that linear move early as possible. So if we're going to swing up our leg really hard, up and back, then that's going to be away from that movement. It's going to kind of take us away from trying to start that initial linear move. But he does start to lead with his hip, but it's really kind of just you're just dropping at this point. Not a lot of forward movement, so it would be better to kind of take an approach here like a Sal's taking, just coming straight up, and as you're moving up, you're moving forward, and your lift leg's just kind of getting in position to close off and just follow the lead hip, which we can see here. So his force vector is already starting to move forward, get linear. Zach's force vector is even pushing back because all he did was he swung the leg up and kind of collapsed down, when a Sao just focused on a modest leg lift and mainly focusing on the initial momentum shift forward. So just be aware of that. So we'll take Zach into his load. So there's his lift leg descending, and he's continuing to lower center of gravity, build flexion of the drive leg. He's moving forward a bit, but not that much, because we can see the force vector is still very vertical at this point. So here's where that lift leg, the reaction of that big swinging lift leg starts to become a problem, because you see how fast the leg is getting out here. Look how quickly the leg's getting out. We don't want that, because at this point you're completely open and you're not even linear back here. So now we have a problem. So watch this Sao here. As his lift leg descends, he tries to keep it back as long as possible. He even goes into extension with the leg to keep it back there, trying to hold it back there so he can take as much time as he can to get the force vector linear, or in that linear position, so he can build power before the lift leg tries to get out and slow everything down. So here he is in the same position as you, except his front foot is still very closed. Yours is very open. He's in a perfect linear position. He's in a perfect linear position. You're still very vertical. So he is now able to build power. You are not at this position. So what you're going to have to do is, you can see is your next frame, you go into extension even though you're not linear, and then you put down. So it was late because your force vector was late. So your front foot is down, you're still on the rubber, your ankle hasn't even kicked through, and your hips are still very closed. So watch this Sao, because he's closed and he's linear. Now he can go into triple extension. He has time before his front foot lands to fully extend the leg, and that's what we want. That's what we build our power. That's what we start a hip rotation. So we can see as he goes in, his belt buckle's to the camera here, as he goes into knee extension, ankle extension, there goes the belt buckle. Now it's pointing towards the target as he lands and settles, and it completely opens. So we can see that it was explosive too. He's about a good 1.5 feet off the rubber. Full triple extension, great stride, knee behind heel, front leg completely stable, and the hips are open, shoulders are closed. So that's how to perfectly implement an explosive drive and convert that to hip rotation and hip to shoulder separation. So the first main component of a high velocity pitcher is rotating the hips as early as possible, as fast as possible at front foot strike. Because if we do that, then that starts building torque and starts moving our power up the kinetic chain, which we can see here. Right when his front legs hit and stabilized, his hips were open, and we can see it pulled away from his shoulders and gave him that optimal hip-shoulder separation. So in the case of Zach, he lands, stabilizes, hips just starting to open, but now we have to wait for the hips to come around, and then it comes around here, and it's hard to see with this camera, but we can see here when he landed, hips closed, shoulders closed, and when the hips came through, hips open, shoulders open. So there's no separation. We must have separation. It's 80% of a pitcher's potential velocity. We must have it because it's a force multiplier. So that's the only way you're going to move into all these other high velocity components after front foot strike. It's really never works if you're trying to make up for the lack of torque in your delivery. It just doesn't happen. Torque is a product of some type of power, some type of energy, some type of force pulling on a pivot, pulling on a joint to create some type of torque in that joint, or between the two joints, like in the case of the hips and shoulders. So if we don't have the force, then we won't have the torque. So if we land with very little force, which converted to very little torque, trying to continue to apply the torque at that point or apply more torque specifically at that point, is pretty much impossible. So at this point in the delivery, if you haven't gotten the job done, like in the case of Zach here, he doesn't have the hip shoulder separation, then trying to make up for it as we go through what 3X pitching calls the throwing phase is really just impossible, almost impossible. So if we do this correctly, like a sow, the shoulders will rotate, multiplying the speeds of the hip. As long as the front leg stays stable, it'll push us into optimal external rotation. And we can see here, if we don't have the force multiplier, if we don't have the shoulders closed, the hips open, building the torque, then we can't really see where he is here, but you won't see much external rotation. You'll see late internal rotation, which we see here. His arms are way across his body before he internally rotates, and you're going to see him a lot more vertical as well, because those accelerating speeds in the shoulders will also push the pitcher into forward trunk tilt. So it'll get him into that more forward position at release. And you can see he gets that early internal rotation. He stays stable and continues with some decent forward trunk tilt. So just Zach doesn't. His lift leg pretty much ruins his chance to get linear through his drive leg. Then his drive leg could be a little bit more explosive. It just kind of collapsed. And ultimately, he didn't create hip rotation and front foot strike. Zach can learn to get linear early at the force vector, build enough power through triple extension before front foot strike to create early and fast hip rotation and front foot strike. Then you're going to better chance you're going to create optimum hip shoulder separation. And as long as he stays strong and stable in the front leg, it will work itself up the kinetic chain and put you into a high velocity category. So with the 3X pitch velocity program, we use the throwing program to train the motor coordination around these movements, but ultimately we use a strength and conditioning program to develop ourselves into a power athlete, so we can actually move our body through this motor coordination. So you gotta be the power athlete first before you can run the power pitcher. You can't do it the other way around, but we do it together. We're constantly programming or working to program the motor coordination because that's the foundation. But once the body's ready to grow and develop, if we have the foundation in place, once it's ready to grow and develop, once that power to weight ratio breaks 100% of your body weight, then we really take off, and that's when that velocity increase really takes off, and we really see that significant increase in velocity. So I hope this helps, man. I appreciate you being patient on the video analysis. I was out of town for a couple weeks coaching in Europe, but appreciate your patience, and I hope this helps.